Hey folks, it's Margaret Crenshaw with the Perdome team at Carolina Realty Group, and today we're talking real estate stuff with Catherine Scarminach of Novit and Scarminach Law Firm. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Margaret.
So the first question I have for you today is just tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised, I guess you could say, in Hilton Head. I was born before the bridge, so I was actually born in Savannah, but I've been here for the better part of all of my life, and I've been practicing law now for about 13 years, initially in Tennessee, and then I came back to Hilton Head about 11 years ago and been working in the firm since. It's my father's firm. The firm's been established for many years. I think we're going on 42.
Yes, and I tell people that he originally came to the island because he was the attorney for Sea Pines. Isn't that true?
He was. He worked for Sea Pines Corporation. He was in the Army.
That's what it was.
And when he was released, he was just when Sea Pines and Hilton Head was being developed, and one of his friends who had been released before him said, "Why don't you come check it out?" And he took a job with Sea Pines Corporation, and really the rest is history. So
Yes.
that was 1973.
Yes.
So he worked with Sea Pines for several years, and then eventually went off on his own, and he partnered with Herb Novit, who they're both still at the office every day. They're probably there right now doing their thing.
Doing their thing. That's right. And, I went to school with Herb's daughter, Julie.
Oh, right. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yep. Yep. And of course, I remember when you were born.
Well,
But now she's my attorney.
right.
So Hilton Head real estate market is a large second home area. So I do have a lot of clients who are buying second homes who don't live here full time. And of course, I recommend a handful of attorneys on the island. And of course, you and I have ended up therefore doing lots of transactions together.
Yes.
And I just thought it might be helpful to, especially the buyers, because there's kind of more that goes into a closing.
Much more.
In the real estate world for buyers. If we sort of just kind of went through the process, because I get that question all the time, well, what happens, we have a contract, now what happens? So from my perspective, what happens is either I or the client bring you the contract that we've written on 123 Banana Street, and that is the blueprint for
That's the starting point.
the starting point.
Yes.
And then kind of take us from there. What happens
Okay.
with that contract?
We get the contract, we open the file and assign it to one of our paralegals that'll be assisting with closing, and we've got a handful of outstanding paralegals.
Yes, you do.
Yes, that get us from point A to point B. But then we've got to communicate with the other side. The most important thing we do is review title for the purchaser's side. That's a buyer's responsibility, and we order the title examination, and then we review it, and if there are any defects in title, then we communicate with the other side to get those cleared up before closing. It's a requirement of the seller side to be able to give you, transfer the property with a general warranty deed, which means that title is free and clear, as far as we know. As part of a finance transaction, it's a requirement anyway, but when there's a lender involved, and there's a lender's policy of title insurance, and there's also an owner's policy of title insurance, which is equally important because that ensures your individual interests. But the part of the title examination is getting the information to the lender to be able to meet those lender requirements for closing.
So you're communicating directly in a finance situation, you're communicating directly with the lender to make sure that the title meets the requirements
That's right.
of the lender.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, there are financed contracts and then there are cash contracts. And
Correct.
Clearly, financed contracts are going to be a little bit more complicated just because
There's
the
another
lender
party.
involved and
we have to meet the lender's requirements.
Right.
We are at the mercy of the lender for closing and the timeline of closing, and that's all dictated by the lender. When it's a cash closing, there's still order the title exam. We still review title, and then we give the buyer the option to purchase title insurance, an owner's policy of title insurance. With a finance transaction, there's also the option to purchase the owner's policy. The lender's policy only insures up to the value of the loan. So there's always that element of...
So what do you advise? In regards to title insurance? A lot of
Always
people
get
ask
title
me that
insurance.
question.
Yes.
Always get it?
Always get it.
Did you hear that?
Always get it.
Title insurance.
Always get title insurance. It's not, the title examination does give you some protection. We can see, what's happened along the chain of title, but there are hidden risks that an ordinary title examination might not pick up on. Fraudulent transfers, if there's fraud involved, if there's a will that wasn't properly probated, or an heir that nobody ever knew about. These things, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does come up, it's a big deal, and it's an expensive deal. And not only does it cover your interest in the property, but it also covers your litigation costs if you have to go that route. And even if it's a claim that goes nowhere, you've still spent money on legal costs. So if you've got title insurance, that's all covered.
That would be the best reason for me right there.
And it's just a one-time premium that you pay at closing. I know a lot of times you get to the closing table and you've already spent money on this and that, and it's like one more
thing. A fee for this and a fee for that and a fee for
right, and you might think, who really needs that? But it's a one-time fee. You pay it one time. You're protected for as long as you or your heirs own the property, and you never have to worry about something unforeseen happening. So it's absolutely recommended.
Awesome. Okay, so title search. And then the other component would be your major duty is the settlement statement.
Right. Yes. The buyer side prepares the settlement statement. So we contact the communities and they give us their assessments. They tell us what's due, what needs to be collected at closing, and we use those numbers to prorate what is either going to be due from the purchaser in the form of a credit to the seller for funds that they've already spent, or things that, credits that are going to come back to the purchaser. We account for all of that in the settlement statement.
Yes, so that's, and especially in our area where we have so many gated communities and they come with their different fees, and then the town has their own transfer fees, and those are always big questions for my buyers from out of town, particularly that just to know that the attorney is going to get you set up for the initial payments, and then from there, I think this is something we always talk about at the end of the signing session, is that they take their settlement statement then to the POA office, and the POA office sets them up for how they're going to make their
accounts. Yes,
their accounts.
And we do everything. We do all the communicating. You don't ever have to find out what do I have to pay. We account for all of that on the settlement statement, and we just collect everything at closing. It's very unusual for you to have to come up with some fee that you've got to pay outside of those costs.
Outside of the closing. And before we got started, we're talking about our taxes here are done a little bit differently, and only you can explain it.
Yes, the taxes are paid in arrears. So actually right now at this time of year,
that's right,
the assessor's office is very busy preparing tax bills for the year 2021. But given that we pay taxes in arrears for most of the closings that are done during the year, we don't know what the taxes are going to be. So we take last year's amount and we prorate based on last year's amount, and then we collect that from the seller at closing. They give that money to the purchaser in the form of a credit. So when the tax bill comes out at the end of the year, it's going to go to the purchaser, and the purchaser is going to be responsible for the entire year, even though they didn't own the property for the whole year. That's the tax.
That's right. So they can rest assured they're getting the portion of the tax money from the seller during the time of which the seller owned the home, based on what they think the tax bill will be according to last year's bill.
And it's usually close enough that it's not an issue. And all attorneys' offices handle that the same way. So we're all doing that at closing. And again, it's typically close enough that it's not an issue. If there is, most attorneys' offices do what's called a tax proration agreement. We all have our own different forms, but they all say essentially the same thing, that when the tax bill does come out, there's a large discrepancy between what was on the settlement statement and what was actually due, then you can go back and renegotiate, and the parties can settle outside of closing. But it's been very rare in the years that I've been doing closings that we've had to go back and do that. So
That's also comforting. Good to know.
Yes.
And so then what happens when we actually get to the closing table? Because I pretty much hand you a contract,
Right.
and then unless I need to ask you something, then I see you again at the closing
That's
table.
right.
And that could be 2 weeks, 30 days, or 45 days,
Right.
or whatever the
Depending on
length of
if there's a
the,
lender involved or not. But
Right.
like I said, we take care of everything. We communicate with the lender, we communicate with the other side, we communicate with the client to keep them apprised of what's going on and what, if anything, we need from them if we need any additional information. One thing that we talked about earlier was your presence at closing. It's not necessarily required that you be at closing, but that's
True.
That's something that you need to decide early on if you're going to be there or not, because if you do close by a power of attorney, that has to be approved by the lender if there's a lender involved, and it has to be, we've got to have the original in hand at closing. So there are some requirements there that if you think you're not going to be at closing, that's something that we need to know very early on. For a cash closing, we actually don't need to do a power of attorney. There's only a couple of documents that need to be signed.
You can just sign remotely.
Correct.
That's important because, again, it's a second home market. I have a lot of buyers from out of town. They're not always planning to come
Right.
to the island. In some cases they do, in some cases they don't, but either way, closing can occur, and it's
Correct.
not a problem.
That's right.
As long as most of my clients just want to know, well, who do I send the money to?
Right.
And you all have always been
Yes.
clear on
Yes, we
wiring
give those
funds
to you, right. That's, I should have said as part of when we get the file, we communicate with the client right away. We send out our engagement letter and an information sheet that asks, all the information that we need. And one of the questions is, do you plan to be present at closing? We ask about title insurance and everything else, but we do communicate with you early on, and we let you know what is going to be needed at closing. And the other thing, that settlement statement doesn't come out until right before closing, because so much of it is based on prorations and what day you're going to close, that you can't do it too far in advance because things change. We had situations before where we don't know the amount of money at the closing till we get right up till closing. So
you have a general idea.
We have a general
you just don't
idea.
know exactly
Yes,
the amount.
and we can have you wire a little bit more that's necessary and wire it back or give you that money back at closing. I know it gets very intense in those last couple of days, and I know people can get nervous about, is this really happening? But
Well, it's a very good point you've just made, and something that I'd like to drill in a little bit here. So a lot of people ask me how come they don't have a settlement statement the week before. And you said it very clearly just now. It's because of the way everything is prorated. So it can't be done a week in advance in most cases. It has to be done just prior to, and just the days prior to closing. And your attorney is always going to reach out to you with those final amounts, where to wire it, when to wire it, and there should be no reason for a lot of sweating going on right at the at the final. So here's the other thing I want to discuss, because a lot of folks think they're at the closing table, they've signed their 463 documents that they have to sign, and boom, it's closed. When in actuality, it's not closed, until
Right. It's not closed until both sides have signed all of their documents and the money has been exchanged for the signed seller documents. So we're not officially closed until that happens. So and here's another thing that a lot of out-of-state buyers and sellers might not know. We don't all sit down at the table together.
That's true. That's a good point.
I get that asked all the time. Where's the sellers, or where are the buyers? So they're with their attorney in their office, and they, especially with the sellers, they might have signed their documents, a week before, because again, there's a lot less involved in the seller side transaction. So there's no sitting around the table with all the parties on the day of closing. We close with our clients, the other party closes with their clients, then the attorneys get together and do the exchange, we call it, and that's, once the exchange is complete, we disperse the funds and you're officially closed.
Okay, and then so we had a little bit of a tense transaction just a little while ago. My buyers were closed. they had signed and they needed to get the key. They needed to get into the property. They had a tight turnaround. They needed to get back to their home state. And you can't disperse a key unless everything is already lined up ahead of time and closed.
Right.
You're
It might not be
gonna,
right away.
you might not get that key right away. And the other thing I sometimes, not sometimes, always, recommend that my buyers make sure that they don't plan to have occupancy the same day of closing in the event.
Right.
Should something go awry and they don't actually close, they wouldn't be able to spend the night in that property that evening. And so for our out-of-town buyers, might be smart to get a hotel room backup just in case for that night.
Right. Yes, definitely have a plan. I mean, we do everything we can to make closing happen on the day of,
Absolutely.
and everybody get their money and get possession, but things happen sometimes that are just out of everyone's control.
Right.
So
and this past year, we've had some doozies
Yes.
together, you and I, down
Yes.
to the but just because the whole market has been flooded.
Right.
All of
Everybody.
the service
Yes.
providers in this industry
Right.
have been just slammed. So kudos to you for keeping it all together and
our
keeping
best.
everybody organized and whatnot.
Yes.
And then what did I leave out? Did I leave
I
out
don't
any
know.
important
You know, you talked
points?
about the closing and signing the 463 documents. That's always
Why
it's
are
always
there
fun.
so many documents?
so many documents. They want to make sure that they're authorized and reauthorized and authorized again to release information that they've already released. But you know, that's just part of the process. There are certain documents that have to be signed as part of the closing package. So you know, a lot of times I give a document to people and they say, I've signed this. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you have. I'm sure
It
you
has
have,
to be
but
in this
it's all got to
little
be in the
pile
packet.
right here.
Yes.
You're very good at keeping papers organized. I have
You
always,
and I are good
I've
like
always
that.
thought about
Yes.
that.
Yes. I don't like a messy pile.
Yeah, it's good to
distracting.
keep it all together.
Yes.
So this question is very important.
Okay.
Do you mind that I come to every single closing?
I like it that you come to the closings.
Okay, that doesn't drive you nuts?
No. I think it's comforting for the client to know that you're there from the beginning to the end. I mean, I like seeing you. I don't know that, you know, it's awkward when I don't know the realtor. But, you know, it's not really about me. So I think it does show the client that you're committed to getting them all the way through this. Because things do come up in closing sometimes, and you know, it's kind of like a panic, and having that person because we don't a lot of times don't meet the client until we're sitting at the table together. Most of the time we don't.
That's so true.
You know, there might be some telephone conversations and some emails, but you know, we're strangers. So having the realtor there, I think is a good thing.
Well, because I think it's 50-50. I just sort of learned from the very beginning of my real estate career that was something that you should definitely do. But I know lots of realtors who don't. But to what I've enjoyed about doing so many closings with you is that even that it's really sort of the same speech over and over again, but it's helped me understand the process so much more.
Sure.
And then that way I think I can be a better advisor to my clients.
Right.
But, you know, realtors are not attorneys. I think you said to me one time in the heat of the moment about something, a listing agent was trying to, I don't know, I can't remember what it was, but you said to me, wait a minute, realtors don't get to make these decisions. Attorneys make these decisions. And I was like, ooh, that was one of the most important things I think that anyone's ever said to me.
Well, there's a fine line
Yes.
because, you know, it just because you're so involved. And a lot of times you do know the answer because you've seen it before. But they've got to be careful about giving legal advice.
That's right. You know, realtors are negotiators, but
well, and you smooth things over too, you know, and I think that's important for realtors to have that rapport with each other, that you can work out a problem before it gets to the attorneys, because once it gets to the attorneys, if it turns into a major issue, you know, those are billable hours.
Yep.
So
then it's going to be an expensive problem,
right?
Or issue.
Right. I mean, if it's necessitated, then yes. But you know, the little things that you all iron out beforehand, it's, you know, that's a good thing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of anything else that we should talk about today. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've answered a lot of questions for a lot of people.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I know that I'm going to get a lot of feedback from buyers and sellers alike. And so I will send them directly to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. And please tune in next week when we're talking real estate stuff with another home service provider. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.